We got two great guests in studio, as you can imagine.
Oh, Sean,
wow,
you are
thank
the
you,
man.
Sean. What is that delivery service?
It.
Very cool. All right, James Thomas from the Mason County EDC is here this morning. Morning, James.
Good morning. How are you today, Jeff?
Good to see you. Thank you. We are well. And you have brought in the interim director of the Mason County EDC, Jim Toomey. So James and Jim is how we'll signify these two. Morning, Jim. Nice to meet you.
Yes, nice to meet you both as well.
Nice to meet you.
James, tell me a little bit about the search that has been ongoing. I know it's been a off and on long process, but we've seemed to have come across Mr. Toomey here. And tell me a little bit about...
At least it's not as bad as mine. Mine's like the good, bad, and the ugly.
Wild, wild west. It happens. Anyways, James, tell me a little bit about how you got connected with Jim here.
Well, I must first give props to EDC Vice Chair Kristen Masteller, who led the search committee, and she and that committee have done a fantastic job. We looked at a number of candidates. Several, I think I told you last time, rose to the level of adequate, but not to the level of great.
Okay.
But in that process, Kristen ran across Jim Toomey, who is retired from the Pasco port system and has a long background in economic development, and managed somehow to drag him kicking and screaming out of retirement to be our interim executive director. So the process continues. Kristen, unfortunately, we're going into her busy time of year with PUD1, so she's had to step away from the chair of that committee. But Danette Brannon, who you talked with last week, I believe, has stepped in, and I have no doubt that that Danette will do as good a job as Kristen did.
Very nice.
So, that said, let's talk about Jim Toomey and all of the wonderful assets he brings to the Mason EDC.
Executive Director at the Port of Pasco for 22 years.
Correct.
Talk to me about the size of that port and how that place would would kind of get you in line for being here in Mason.
Sure. Port of Pasco, one of, I think, 79 port districts in the state of Washington. And in terms of overall operating revenue, probably 10th or 11th, which says a lot about how many small ones there are. But Port of Pasco operated the Tri-Cities Regional Airport, which is now probably the third largest airport in the state. About 50 employees, kind of went up and down. We had some temporary guards. 17 miles of railroad, 1.2 million square feet of warehouse and industrial space, etc., along the marketing elevator space that we've got. But over the years, we did a lot of very, very closely connected work with Franklin County, which is where Pasco is located, and a lot of small communities, some of which much smaller than Shelton, Mason County, but about 60,000 people in the county, so similar in size. Got a firsthand exposure to just how difficult it is for economic development in small communities. There's never enough assets, there's never enough people, there's plenty of ideas, there's plenty of energy, so focusing those activities, ideas, and energy is sometimes the largest challenge. Prior to the port, I was at an organization called TRIDEC, which is the exact equivalent of the Mason County EDC, and I was the quote-unquote director and only industrial recruiter there. Kind of the beginning stages of what they called then Team Washington now has grown into this very, very statewide coordinated activity for recruitment of businesses to your local communities. And the jobs or the focus or the programs that were there was business recruitment, business assistance and retention, and there was also something that was called quality of life, which was whatever you wanted it to be. So a great deal of exposure in my history to, at least in my history outside of military and government service and so forth, a great deal of exposure to working with small communities, working on lots of projects, trying to help focus things, trying to help sort through what's going to work, what's not going to work without and also trying to maintain some form of credibility of I'm not trying to be selective or partial to one party or another. Let's try to get through this together and collaboratively.
When it comes to bringing in business or economic development, do you see it more of a bringing the outside into a community or helping what is in the community now grow up more?
Well, like everything else, it's a combination of both. I think when you're talking about helping the community grow, that would be business retention. I think just from a logic standpoint, if you look at trying to bring the outside world in, there's a lot of organizations. There's thousands of organizations trying to do the exact same thing. Very, very competitive environment, trying to find somebody that's going to like your community, that your community fits their needs perfectly, that your market is accessible to what their markets are, etc. Whereas the businesses you have, they're already here. So I think there's, in terms of return on investment, if you want to look at it in that crass kind of manner, there's a great deal of value to making sure you understand what the needs are of your local businesses, what their markets are, who their suppliers are. Do they have any thoughts about what makes sense? That doesn't mean every thought is going to translate to an investment, but it's a tremendous way to get up to speed rather quickly. It's just exactly what the rest of the world thinks of your community is by talking to your own local businesses. So I don't know if that answers your question, but you got to do both.
What were some of the challenges at Tridec and the Port of Pasco that you were able to overcome that proved that the businesses are out there and they are interested in coming to smaller communities?
Oh, wow. J.R. Simplot, Twin City Foods, they all relocated to Pasco. There was logistics providers, Pasco a little bit, Tri-Cities, Richland, Kennewick, and Pasco, a little bit different. It was somewhat the center of the universe for freight moving around the state and throughout the Northwest. So there was a number of logistics providers that relocated there. It was a population base. There was a couple of very small warehouse distribution companies, small meaning smaller than Walmart, smaller than those types of organizations, but they settled in the proximity. So I'd say that that we coined the phrase very early on, and you do have to kiss a lot of toads before you find that prince.
Yeah. And
it is an extremely competitive environment. So the challenge is always how many resources do you have, and how do you get those resources focused? You never have enough money to do everything, but you usually have, if you know what your priorities are, and if those priorities match the needs of what you intellectually can match to what the outside world's needs are, you got a pretty good shot at it. But it is a patience and persistence business.
You bring up a good point about kind of the Tri-Cities being a hub center there in eastern Washington, and I would consider South Sound with Shelton on the edge outskirts of it, with I-5 north and south and the 101 around the other side of the South Sound, that we too could be kind of a jumping off point for many of these, not like widget, but like a widget factory or something to get up and down the coast or up and down I-5. Are you familiar and comfortable with trying to court those types of folks into our area? I know there are some challenges to get to I-5, but we've got a lot of benefits here, as you are soon to understand. So is that something that you're looking at to help try to bring in?
I would say that just the way I personally approach these type of challenges, I start with trying to get a feel for just everything that's been done in the past and get some kind of an assessment of what was the logic behind those approaches or those targets. I know quite a few folks in the economic development business that, and also some folks up there at the Department of Commerce for the state of Washington. I'd say, well, what do you think? What seems to make sense to you? I know I have a number of industry contacts, just personal friends type of thing. So for me, it's a learning experience right now. I'm not intending to walk in and take all the shelves and all the background that's been done before and throw it out, because I think that's a major mistake. So right now, the focus for me is just nose to the grindstone, try to get a feel for what works, what's a good match for just the natural assets of the region. And I don't just mean natural resource assets, but things like access to transportation, volume of, I see a rail line moving through here, but those appear to be spurs to come to specific businesses. Need to talk to those businesses to see, is there a possibility to add capacity? So there's a lot of just head scratching and learning. Some of it's very much common sense, but a comprehensive view is what's appropriate, not just it makes sense. I like it here. Why doesn't everybody else?
Right.
So it's always a difficult balance.
Jim Toomey, the new interim director for the Mason County EDC, along with James Thomas. Thank you so much for coming on. It was really nice to meet you.